shall I say, we're living in a timeline where it seems like everyone has trauma, everyone else is a narcissist, and at least that's according to, like, literally anyone you talk to or anyone that's, like, on the internet.
Well, hello, welcome everybody to episode 12 of I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here Today, our conversational, cultural savvy podcast for folks trying to make sense of a world that has gone sideways. We're here to unpack the issues that boggle our minds, all rooted in history, culture, humor, group therapy, and humility. I cut out the little Des and all of that. I figured today it's not just a little group therapy, it's actual group therapy. So no littles today. I am Chris Bevelo, owner of Bearing 287, an organization fighting the good fight to make the world a better place for all, and the sponsor of the show. I am joined by my co-host Des, who is a social impact comm strategist by day and who spends her nights remixing history to make sense of the present. Hello, Des.
Welcome to the spring frequinox.
This, well, I'm
I
not
don't
sure
know.
what that means. Do you need to explain that, or does you just make that up?
I feel like I've heard it before, but it's spring equinox. I don't know. I always call it frequinox, but that might just be like a queer thing or something. I don't know.
Maybe it is. Maybe I don't know. I've never heard Freakonox before. Is it actually the equinox today?
No, it was
No,
a
it's
couple
not
days
even
ago,
today.
but it's officially
Yeah.
spring now.
Okay. So it's the remnants. It is springy. It is springy. That is true. And it's unusually springy here. So that's great. We will take it. And I can't remember where you are. Are you still in Chicago?
Still in Chicago, last 2 weeks.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk more about that because we have a guest with us. We have the esteemed Dr. Coreen Haym, who I'm going to introduce you first, and then I'm going to say hi, and you can say hi back. How about that? Because we're going to talk about pop psychology today. I can't wait. But first, let's talk about Coreen, who's joining us, a licensed marriage and family therapist and professor of marriage and family therapy, teaching therapists to be therapists in graduate and doctorate programs. So all the therapy stuff there in one sentence. We're really thrilled to have you. As you know from listening to our podcast, because I'm sure you listen to every single episode. I think
Everyone.
that's required. Everyone, you know how much we rely, Des and I, on you and my wife, Tanya, who's also a therapist, who can't be with us today. But yes, we rely on you quite a bit. And we often reference therapy and therapy adjacent issues. And that is for the good and for the bad, I would think. Maybe you might think. Tanya might think that as well. I will try not to speak for Tanya in this. It can be very difficult for me not to do that. But thankfully, you're here so you can provide all the expertise we need. Welcome. It's
Thank
great
you
to
so
have you.
much. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're our second official guest.
Yeah.
You're in the pantheon. You're like your face will be chiseled on Mount. I'm not even supposed to be here today. Whatever that
Fantastic.
looks like.
It's an honor.
Yeah, I don't know if it is. Des, do
Yeah.
you think it's an honor?
I mean, I always think it's an honor to be in the presence of Koreans. Biased.
Oh wow. Okay.
A little
Okay,
bit
that's
about
fair.
about our
Yeah, there you
relationship.
go. There you go. So we wanted to talk about pop psychology, and we thought a great way to get into that is to talk about Netflix dating shows, which are hot right now. Now, I'm just going to set this up by saying I don't watch any of the Netflix dating shows, and I don't really watch any of the reality shows with intention, but my wife consumes them. And so when we're together, I often get drawn in and suddenly I have opinions on what's happening. But I don't think, well, I'll hear what you guys are watching. And I'm not sure we're watching any of what you're watching. What are you watching? What are the hot Netflix dating shows?
Well, currently we're watching The Age of Attraction on Netflix, which is all about the age gap relationships. I think is jumping on the age gap bubble bandwagon. As we've seen a number of movies that have come out that have been around this topic, like Baby Girl, and I think there was like another recent one with like Jessica Chastain or something like that. But I too am not a reality TV watcher. But I actually got into watching these with Coreen, I guess, like 3 years ago, when the first one we were watching was Queer Ultimatum. But Coreen, are you an avid watcher of this before Queer Ultimatum?
No, no. As a matter of fact, I think the last reality show I saw before that one might have been like Anna Nicole in 1904. But I think I would say The Age of Attraction and Queer Ultimatum really brought me in because of the subject matter of both of those things are of interest to me. And I think that both of those things have been ignored in media for so long, and certainly from mainstream media, that it kind of brought me in. But once you start watching those shows, you are, like you said, Chris, you are locked in. Once you start getting to know the characters, the people, I mean,
Or
characters, people.
or even when you don't, because what I find myself doing, and this is a common husband meme, is because I see this on TikTok where the wife will film the husband being like, "Why do you watch these shows? You know, like these are just stupid." And then they'll like cut to like 5 minutes later, and the husband's just sitting on the edge of the couch going like, "Well, that's just stupid. Why would he do that?" Like that's so that's what I will do is I'll be working and then I'll hear something and then I'll just be like, "Oh, well, that guy's clearly in the wrong." And I won't know who these people are. I don't even know the premise of this show because there are shows we're watching now that I think we identified as that it's $1 million listings.
The
We think that's the show that we happen to have on in our
It's the
house,
OG
but I
one.
don't know
I
which
don't
one.
know.
Like
There's so many.
I I don't know if it's LA. I think it's LA just from the vibe of the show. Like it's not New York. I think it's LA. Uh, and I just find that even fascinating because there's like they're all hot real estate people and they're sitting at a table and they're negotiating. One's selling the house and one's trying to buy the house. And they're in the same real estate agency and they're talking to each other while they're talking to their clients. I'm like, is this legal? Tanya's like, that's the whole premise of this show. And I'm like, well, it seems really weird that they're trying to help each other. And like, it's more about them winning the deal than helping their clients. I don't know. Seems like a conflict of interest, but
Isn't that
what do I know?
isn't that a metaphor for what we're living through? But I digress. So,
Of interest?
conflict of interest. Can't wait for that documentary. So we're watching these series, and like what's been interesting to me is like they're definitely a far cry from like the trash dating series of yesteryear. So for me, my original like reality series of these types were from MTV, and it was Singled Out, and it was a little show called Next. And if you go back, I was watching something, it was like online, they were just showing clips of just the way people were like, that guy, like they would just cut down the person and they're like, next. And it was like always like the worst thing. Like that kind of stuff would not fly today. But then we cut to these shows. It started with Queer Ultimatum, where I noticed that especially with the second season, I don't know, Korean, maybe you picked up on this too, but like they were just like they were
Mhm.
using so many like just therapy terms, and like just it's so wild to just like watch. Anyways, I don't know, is that something you picked up on, Korean, where it just feels like they're so educated on these things, or so they think, and they're talking about it and they're like navigating. We're watching these like relationships like grow infinitely like over like 2 days and insanity. But I don't know, Kareen, what have you kind of picked up on these shows?
Yeah, I think the quote unquote therapy speak is becoming more popular in general. But I also feel like that I can tell who's been to therapy on these shows and who hasn't by the way they're talking about it, because legitimately you do pick up language from your therapist. You do, and I'm a couples therapist as well, right? So you do pick up that language. You do use it with your partner, particularly when you're in couples therapy. But the fact remains that that language, if they're in therapy, is very specific to their situation, to their individual situations. So I see it a lot on social media all the time, kind of generalized statements that supposedly work for everybody. So I definitely saw this on Queer Ultimatum as well as Age of what is it?
Age of
Age of
attraction.
Attraction. Age of Attraction. Yeah, I've seen it on both of those, but I have to be honest, I see it everywhere. And I can kind of tell, even in my friendship groups, I can see people talking differently, even though at this point, a lot of my friends are therapists. But yeah, I see it everywhere. I see it on all kinds of shows. So it's really common now. It's become having those ways of speaking has become much more common and much more uh, promoted than ever before.
And Chris, I don't know if you kind of picked up on this, like in, kind of our this is especially during or after COVID, during COVID, what have you, when we're having more of these engaged conversations with our coworkers and we kind of let our guard down. It was wild times there for a while, but people were being way more vocal about their journey with their therapist or what have you, or just even these topics coming up or
Hmm.
like in the workplace. Is that something you like kinda experience? I know you were more in, like, leadership level, so you may not have been in the minutia of it with this, but just curious what you've been seeing.
I mean, I would say there's two things that I've seen. One is that people talk about going to therapy like it's normal. And not that it's never not been normal, but it used to be something people did not talk about. They were like, "Ooh, that's something you keep to yourself," right? So now it's just like, like I gotta take my car in to get the oil changed, and I'm going to my therapist, and people don't blink an eye. Not everybody, clearly. That's what we watched this weekend was the manosphere. So I'm assuming those folks don't think that way. But most of the people I run into are all over that. The other thing I will say is I'm assuming we're going to probably talk about this, but I'm assuming what Coreen you're talking about that you did a real good job of framing in a broad way is the use of the terms gaslighting and narcissist have got to be again like I'm going to go get my oil changed and the guy who changed my oil is a narcissist
Hmm.
or stop gaslighting me that I don't need the premium fuel. Like people are
Hmm.
using those phrases. Um, and not always in a way that therapists would agree with. It's probably a fair way to say, like, oh, that's not really how you use those. Um, so those are the things I've noticed. I also will just say, I promise I would not speak for Tanya on therapy. But Karine, I just have to
There
ask
we
you
go.
before
Yeah.
we get into our topics. Are you in the same place as Tanya that when she watches any programming, usually not reality TV, so TV shows, movies where there is a therapist or there's therapy as part of the plot. And as soon as it 1% from what a normal therapist would do, she's out. She's out. She's just like, I can't watch this anymore.
Yes.
Is that a
Uh,
thing? Okay.
yeah, I have the exact same reaction. I think that first of all, we have to we don't talk about it too much. We can talk about it in our homes for a variety of reasons because people don't actually know what therapists do in the room. Not exactly. It takes a long time to become a therapist, but I have the same reaction. I think I had it this past week. Desiree, you had mentioned something. It was a couples therapist show, a new one, and I didn't even see it before I was able to say, no, no, I'm not seeing that. I'm not watching it. Every once in a while I do, and I'm always irritated or frustrated by what I'm seeing. And the deviation happens so quickly. It happens so quickly. It happens from the minute they start it. And it's hard to reality shows are reality shows, but and other shows are still scripted, right? So whatever I see is already an annoyance and a frustration. And not something that necessarily I said we talk about in the general public, but certainly I have the exact same reaction as your wife. Exact same reaction. It's
Yeah.
hard to
Well, that's
watch.
good to know.
Yeah, it's
It's
very,
good to
very
know.
hard to watch.
The two things that I would say from my memory are in treatment, which was on HBO. Uh, Gabriel Byrne was the therapist. She loved that because she felt like that was an actual treated therapy the right way. And she was able to watch Shrinking, even though that is like, she just like, okay, I can let go of this is not anything like what therapy should be. Cause I can't remember what he did. Like he took in one of his patients. He just
Oh,
did all this kind of crazy stuff. Yeah.
I did
I don't know
watch
if you
that one
remember
as
In
well.
Treatment.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm done talking, Tanya. I know you're listening, and she's probably like, "Shut up already!" Like, I'm done. We'll have her on the show at some point. She can talk for herself. But
So, yeah, let's go ahead and jump into our main topic. And so essentially the topic is, as you've already heard and gleaned, is that it's pop psychology. Or shall I say we're living in a timeline where it seems like everyone has trauma, everyone else is a narcissist, and at least that's according to like literally anyone you talk to or anyone that's like on the internet. And so I wanted to just kind of cut through that and understand, like, Coreen, you are an actual licensed therapist. And I think you've already shared a little bit of your take on this, but would appreciate just you, as we're seeing, as we've talked about, like it's showing up in TV shows, reality shows, the internet, social media, what have you. What's kind of your take as a licensed therapist around all of this?
Well, I think there's pros and cons is the issue to both of them. I think that you're right, Chris, about stigma being lowered. As an overarching concept, I think stigma has been lowered. But when we, like you said, when we get to certain groups, that's not the case at all. But overarching, people are starting to recognize in a good way that therapy can be for anyone and that we don't actually give advice. We're not telling people what to do. And so those pieces are good. It's nice to get some of the language out in the public. It's nice to educate the public on things like that. The issue that I have with it and that a lot of therapists have is that it simplifies the process of any kind of healing or changes that people really want to make. Because a lot of these memes that pop up that tell you certain things about yourself, you're going to want to believe them and you're also going to want them to apply to you. Just like any good psychic would do, who's not necessarily a psychic, right? A psychic who's in business, who knows what the next thing is to say because people are very similar in a lot of ways, but they still have in their Venn diagram their own individual journey. So what I see a lot of pop psychology and a lot of these problems, and I think you both use the narcissism as an example. Narcissism is a really interesting one because it is what they call a personality disorder. And for those of you who can't see, I did put that in quotes. Um, you have to meet a certain level of criteria. And so what we don't want to do is diagnose difference. But if when there's a certain level of criteria, then we say, okay, this person is falling into these categories. And it's not to label somebody. As a matter of fact, it's just a categorization so that we can have conversations about it, use the same language, and we can actually research and find some direction for people who actually are coming into us who want help. We're not forcing this as much as some people may think. So when people are talking about it ad nauseum, what I've noticed is that a lot of it's just incorrect, misunderstood, and people don't go further with it. And nothing applies to everyone. Nothing applies to everyone. And we're looking to be validated. People have heard the word confirmation bias since social media has been out more than ever before, which is one of the many, many unbelievable amount of research terms when you get into statistics. So I think that it can be very problematic. I also think that one of the big problems is self-diagnoses. So I don't think that we're not even allowed to diagnose ourselves. And when I say allowed, I don't mean that there's a big therapy diagnosis, God in the sky, slapping our hands if we think something. But diagnosing ourselves comes with a lot of preconceived notions and bias. And our job as therapists is not to be free of bias, but to be able to understand certain biases, implicit bias that we may have as human beings and bring them to the table so that we understand exactly what we're managing as we work with clients on an individual or a couple's level. But if it was as simple as general answers for everybody, which is also in some self-help books, then therapy wouldn't be doing as well as it is right now. And that is a general overarching feeling about it. But I do think it can be problematic in that way and keep people away from therapy when they feel that they are the ones who are always victimized by narcissists. And like Desiree said, if there's one or two qualities, just because you feel a person is egotistical, that doesn't make them a narcissist. It makes them egotistical. So that's just one of many, many, many problems with some of these things that we see. And additionally, trauma is one of those catchphrase words as well.
yeah.
And with the self-diagnosis, I see people talking about, for example, something like dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's nothing like you've seen, going as far back as Sybil to a little bit further, a little more recent, the United States of Terror. That's not how it shows up. And we have young people saying, "Oh, I'm going to bring my personality forward now." It's a truly dissociative state. So you don't actually remember if there's another personality coming forward or not, and it's pretty clear through conversation if that's the case or not. So those are, I guess, a bunch of different ways to look at it because it's not all bad. And I want to make that clear too, that there are some of these pieces that people can get and they can hear from others that can be very helpful and help them look at things a different way. But it won't take you all the way there.
So you
That's super helpful. I I just had an idea pop in my mind. Go ahead, Desiree. I want to hear from you because I have an idea to share.
No,
I'm
I was
curious.
gonna go to you. I saw you taking notes. I was like, "Oh, he's got things to bring up."
Taking notes. Yes, I'm taking notes. So it's interesting. It makes me so where I probably am exposed most to pop psychology is TikTok. I don't spend a ton of time on social media, and my algorithms on social media where I do spend time are mainly political news, sports. It doesn't get into that, or I don't see it. But boy, do I see it on TikTok. Um, and it's not that often, but it, what occurs to me, Coreen, and is it okay to call you Coreen, Dr. Haym, Coreen?
Yeah,
Which
Kareen
do you
is fine.
prefer?
I'm pretty
Okay,
comfortable with Kareen. Yes.
okay. Um, is it reminds me of when medical doctors who I don't follow very many people on TikTok, but because I watch their videos, they just keep coming into my algorithm,
Mhm.
stitched a video with somebody who's like, hey, what you need to do is take ant eggs and pour them in your ear, and that will, clear up your hearing. And then here comes an actual medical doctor saying, time out, no, don't put ants or ant eggs in your ears. This is not a good idea. Um, does anybody, because that would be something I could see you doing, is being the
Putting ant eggs in
actual
my ear. No, I'm
expert
just
on
kidding.
therapy. No, not that part. Hey, to each their own. Like if people want to have ants in their ears, God bless them. But an actual therapy expert who takes these pop psychology, because there's so many, right? And I have age bias against 20 somethings, right? So there's nothing worse to me than a life coach who's 22 and you're like, how could you be a life coach? You're 22 and they're giving all this advice. But that seems to be a lot of where this sits, the influencer generation, and having somebody saying like, hey, this is how you deal with a narcissist, right? You punch them in the face and then you move to a different state and they just give terrible advice or whatever. And then have an actual expert come and say, actually, no, time out. Let's talk about this the right way. So that's my idea for you. You can take that and decide whether you want to go with it. But it would be nice uh, because there probably are really smart therapists out there giving advice on TikTok or social media. But if you don't know, you don't know. And how do you know that somebody is, unless they're, if they're 22, I know. But if they're 40 something and they could be experienced, I don't know. And people lie about their credentials all the time. So yeah, I don't know if you've seen that or
Yeah, I've seen that actually a lot. And if you have a licensed therapist on there with credential, they will always list their credentials. They will always give a disclaimer that everything that they do is not a substitution for licensed therapy. They will explain those things. Additionally, it's funny you say that about age because I'm kind of working on that myself as far as younger people and recognizing that life coaching, for example, is, and I think this is something important for people to know. It's nothing like therapy. There's a smaller certification process you can go through, anywhere from 3 months to a year. And these certification organizations have just popped up and said, I'm a certification organization. It doesn't have a lot of credence, but it might 10 years from now. I don't know. But what I do know is because people forget that certifications are actually businesses that are looking for their bottom line, where licensures are not those. Licensures are given by the state. So it's not necessarily about making money. Now, I digress on that because that's not always the case, but it may not always be the bottom line. So that being said, I think that what we're looking at is life coaching. And I think that no matter what age the therapist is, they can bring a lot to the table because again, we really don't give advice. We are trying to empower our clients by kind of going on a journey with them and helping them recognize more about themselves, their patterns, who they are, what they really want, how to live authentically if possible, at what level can they live authentically. And of course, we're there to actually be there with them on this journey. And it's much more complex process than one might think. So there are a lot of people out there that will deem themselves mental health experts or a life coach who has had this experience. And even life coaching, somebody may have a very specific, they could be 70 and they may, that yes, that experience means a lot, but it also may not apply to everybody. It's still a category and a sample size of one. And I think that it's very difficult to tell somebody because there are licensed therapists out there who do great job on social media, on Instagram and TikTok, but the large majority are not. And like you said, it's very hard to ascertain which is which from the outside.
Can you give a name of some of the ones that are actually good? Like, I know you've said you've shared,
Yeah,
like, Therapy Jeff with me, right? What makes him actually a good person to follow, and, like, who are some others? And it almost kinda giving us indicators of, like, who not to follow or who not to listen to.
right. Therapy Jeff is one of my favorites because he brings in a lot of himself and his own life into these pieces that he can tell people. And what he can do is he can give overarching generalizations, but also explains that they may not fit for everybody. So it's more what's happening with Therapy Jeff is more of an education into some of the knowledge that we have. And for a therapist, there's knowledge, awareness, skills, and self development. All of those things go into becoming a licensed therapist, but knowledge is the baseline of our beginning. That's the beginning of us learning what we do in therapy. Another one is called, he's actually a former student and intern of mine, but is way past that at this point. It's called That Therapist Girl. Her name is Priscilla, and she is absolutely fantastic. She brings in a lot of humor, and she's really good for therapists to watch too, because we're human beings and we have feelings and responses to our clients that we may talk about without identifying information with other therapists. And so she is really fantastic as well. And then there's one, I think it's Nicole, and I don't know if I'm spelling her name right, but it's like Arntz or something along the Arntz, I think is her name. And she's fantastic. And she includes art into what she's doing and the messages she's putting across. And so we find ourselves having to unteach constantly what's out there and recognize that not anything is not going to apply to everybody, but that there are certain things around human nature that we can say, hey, these are some things that generally can apply to most people, where there's a whole bunch of things that don't. But I think being able to find that difference um, comes with our experience. And so when the person isn't experienced or isn't trained in these kind of things, and I don't just mean finishing your master's program, I mean the 3,000 hours that comes after that, the year that comes before that, where you're seeing clients for the first time, all of it together, the incredible work we do to have the person find their own inner journey through therapeutic training is very, very different than a person saying, these things help me, therefore I'm an expert in humans and human behavior and emotions. Does that kind of answer that question a little bit?
Yeah, 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 and I'm curious, you had mentioned something about the idea of, you know, is maybe some people think like therapy is like, oh, they give advice. Like you said, like it's not about giving advice. It's about empowering the person to essentially kind of
No.
get there. So I'm curious, you're a therapist yourself, you teach other budding therapists, what are some of the things that kind of go into becoming a therapist and what inspired you to become one?
Well, I'll start with what inspired me. I became a therapist a little bit later, although I'm now teaching people who are becoming therapists well into their 50s and everything in between. But I think that what inspired me was I thought to myself, I had done a lot of different careers and lived a little bit of a wild life in my 20s and decided that I needed to stabilize some things. I had college, so I thought, okay, what would I do every day that I'd enjoy doing that I could get paid for? And I just knew that a lot of people would come to me, a lot of people trusted me, and I gave great advice. And that was one of the things that inspired me. I'm like, oh, I can just sit and listen to people and give them advice all day. I'm going to school to be a therapist. I had a good experience in therapy. And then I got to school. And it became very clear that number one, and it does with all my students, that's not what therapy is. Number two, I'm not just going to sit and listen and give advice at all. As a matter of fact, it's much more difficult than that. So, what goes into being a therapist? Well, first, the education. Undergraduate is helpful, your college degree to understand, but you're again, you're only learning knowledge, and it's usually in a kind of a limited way, particularly if it's psychology undergraduate. But in general, it's a limited perspective and it's knowledge only. You're not going to get, and you're certainly not going to get the amount of knowledge in class that you get in a graduate program. But once you go into your graduate program, what people don't recognize is in addition to learning all the research, all of the modalities, all of the theory application, all of the theories, learning a biopsychosocial integration of why people become who they are, why they act the way they do, why they feel and respond the way that they do. That's the beginning of it. Throughout all of the classes, you're talking about yourself. Every student has to talk about themselves in a vulnerable way, which sounds terrible for most people, but it is not like a degree in chemistry where they don't worry about who you are as a person. They want you to be able to do that math, whatever it is that you need to do in chemistry, which I'm pretty ignorant about. And that's it. You graduate and you can go on about your business. But with us, it looks a lot different. It is what you are becoming as a human. People come out of these programs very different. Their relationships change where you are bringing so much up about yourself because one of the most important qualifications as a therapist is to assure as much as possible that how you think, your life path, your life experiences are not projected onto your client. And that's a lot of what we're seeing with inexperienced or not uneducated. I should say that people are very educated at times, but not in this realm of what's happening on social media and out in the world and people talking about these things on a regular basis. What I would also say is that after you've done your master's program, after all of that, you've gone through these residencies, you've gone through these in-person experiences, what they call pre-practicum, then practicum. Now you're seeing clients with an excessive amount of what we call clinical supervision. They're doing 2 to 4 hours a week of bringing these cases into their small groups with their clinical supervisor. And usually for us, it's a certain kind of approved supervisor. That's another qualification that we need to get. And they're doing that through all through school for the last year, usually, if not a little longer. Then they graduate. They've taken all these classes, written all these papers, explored themselves through all of this, as well as learned all of it. And then time comes for the licensure journey. The licensure journey doesn't happen right away either. So for many states, you take a test. Everybody has to take, actually, all the states, you have to take an exam, which can be very complicated. It's all application of these theories, all application of ethics and diversity and culture and all the things that we need to learn to be good therapists, be able to work with almost anybody. But after that, in addition to that, now you have find yourself another clinical supervisor. And that person's going to be with you usually I don't know, probably an hour or two a week. And they're usually available for emergencies, phone calls, ethical situations, possible CPS calls, possible suicidal ideation, and all the other things that can come up in sessions. And that's about another 3,000 hours. It's sometimes more. New Jersey, for instance, is 4,000 hours. I believe Texas is 2,000. But that's a lot of extra work. So it takes 5 to 6 years for most people to become a licensed therapist. So once they graduate, they can start seeing clients. They've already seen clients in school, but now the supervision is a little less. Now they're weaning off, but the supervisor is still legally responsible for them. So it's actually pretty complex, the process to doing this. And I think that when I got into school, and it's the same when these students come into school, they don't know what they're getting into. And you do change. You do change. And so as a professor, I love this part. I love the part where they all just say, "Oh, wait, so we're not giving advice." I'm like, "No, because you don't know. You're not the expert of that person's. You're well trained in how to help them move forward in the way that they want to move forward. They're setting the goals, not you. They're saying, I'm coming here because," and you ask something along the lines of, what would it look like when you don't need or want to come here anymore? Everybody does it a little differently. Every therapist looks different. Every therapist does things a little differently. But if you go to 5 therapists, chances are they're going to say similar things to get you to think and move in the direction that you'd like to move. So it's not as simple as what's healthy or not healthy. which is, I think that word is a little bit overused and trite and not exactly accurate, because what might be healthy to one person is absolutely not healthy to another, just like in eating.
Well, so that is a good segue to a question that's in my mind, Coreen, because we talked about therapists. So you can decide how far you want to go with this. And you can respond to this in general, or you can respond to this individually. Because there are therapists slash psychiatrists who don't necessarily have the best reputation. And doesn't mean that they're universally panned, but there's certainly a section of the populace that see them as scammers, or I don't know what the right word is. Dr. Phil comes to mind.
Yes, it
Grifters.
did.
Mel Robbins.
Yes, it
What's
did.
that? Des?
Grifters.
Grifters. So whatever you want to call him, you got Dr. Phil. Mel Robbins seems to get that a lot. Jordan Peterson, who I didn't even know was a psychiatrist, but uh, boy, uh, he's controversial. So you could say Dr. Phil, as just an example, is one reason why therapy is more in the mainstream because of his show and because he popularized it, right? But also, it turns out the guy's I don't know, in my opinion, he's a jackass.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know about his therapy credentials, but and I know that from what I've read and from conversations Des and I have had, the therapy community has feelings about Mel Robbins, again, not universally, but talk about whoever you want to talk about if you're comfortable, or just in generality, that balance between, okay, some of these folks are making this more popular, but also not always a good thing,
Yeah,
if
and
that's true.
I
That's your
love
point
that.
of
I
view.
know, and I love that you brought up Mel Robbins, because the whole world was worshiping her when I wasn't. And finally, some of this is coming out, and all the therapists talked amongst ourselves with this "let them" thing, and we're like, oh, so radical mindfulness acceptance, like we already knew what that is. It's very hard to practice. It's not new and brilliant. And is she? I don't. She's not a therapist, right?
She's not.
No, she's not a therapist.
What is she?
She's a.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
I mean, I think she gets lumped in there because of the advice, right? It's just advice, but um, it really has stirred up from what I've seen, and I think you just addressed it, the therapy community. So I think there's that, no, 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 that's not therapy, which is
Yeah.
fair.
Well, and I think one of the things is that well, first let me get to Dr. Phil. Let me start with Phil, because Dr. Phil was a licensed psychologist who lost his license for ethical concerns. He also was a substance abuse professional. He's not an MFT, marriage and family therapist, or couples therapist. He had no business doing that. And one of the reasons, now again, I can't speak for Tanya, but one of the reasons I have a hard time with therapy reality shows is because our ethical codes, which are there for good reasons. I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and the ethics are not just, we can't do that. There's excellent reasons. There are stories that I could tell that would blow your mind, about things I've witnessed and things that have happened. And so the ethics guide is more than just we can or can't do it. And people are not going to understand some of those regulations. One of the ethics guides is that we are to keep everything confidential, and that we need a release of information, right? So I know in these reality shows they get those, to have a release of information. But the reason that Dr. Phil wasn't licensed, so he never needed that. We would never talk to our clients the way he talks to people. And so I watched that evolution with him. And at the time, I was a little more passionate about people who didn't get it. Now I'm like, they don't get it. That's why I'm glad you're having this show. But at the time, it was very, very, it angered me, that I saw all of these ethical concerns just being stripped over. And he knew because he did have a psychology degree. And so when I think about, you know, one of the things that we see is, let me give you an example with one of these memes that works really well. You might see something out there like, maybe, and I love this one, I've had friends post it, maybe it's not trauma. Maybe it's all the oppression, or maybe, no, I'm sorry, maybe it's not major depressive disorder. Maybe it's the trauma that you've had to regulate the entire time, and these are just survival skills. And maybe you don't have major depressive disorder. Maybe it's just a normal reaction to trauma. We know that, once again, and yes, of course it is. And major depressive disorder is not, people will say things like situational versus clinical. That's not our language. Major depressive disorder is because they have a clump of symptoms that we can research and help with. The etiology for most therapists, or I should say where it comes from, isn't really that important. That's for the researchers. And so for us, it's much more important of, oh, they meet this criteria of symptomology. Let me look at the research. Let me consult with other people. Let me learn what the best way is or the best road that might be helpful to them. And at that point, we can individualize it, which is impossible to do on reality television. Additionally, um, there's the Hawthorne effect. When the camera's in your face, you're not going to be yourself. And that's whether it's a therapist or people that are in couples therapy. It's going to be edited. It's not going to be a real representation of what therapy looks like. And there's magic that happens in the room that nobody's going to see. So we do have people out there with credentials that don't do a good job. The large majority of them have either given up those licensures or they just do it anyway. But I think for me personally, and this is not to put down people who have been on TV as therapists doing therapy. I know once in a while it happens. But I've been asked before and I turned them down. Twice I've turned down something like that for reality television because it's not within my code of ethics. And I know that we can get around that because our code of ethics is not a law, it's a guide. So there are a lot of people, there's bad therapists out there. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think that when you start putting yourself on TV, it becomes about you and not about the client. And once it becomes more about you than the client, therapy becomes a back burner process. Additionally, just a clarification, people often don't know the difference between a marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, a professional counselor, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist. And just to throw it out there, psychiatrists do not do therapy. And the ones that do are practicing out of their scope unless they've gotten extra degrees or licensures. They are asking questions, they are assessing a situation so that they are medical doctors, generally speaking, or nurse practitioners who are able to look at what medications might work if the person would like. They're coming to them for medication if the person would like to consider those. Again, they're not forced on people. It's how can we help? And a psychiatrist usually helps with.
It's interesting the terminology that has been like kind of translating through the ages. Like I remember back in the day, my analyst. This is like the
Right.
oh my god, what was that dance show? Fame. The movie Fame,
Mhm.
where the sweet guy that lived in the building that had like the neon sign in it, he was always somehow like, "Oh, my analyst said da 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 da." And then you get to like a therapist and like all of the lists, and like they all do different things. So and to clarify, Mel Robbins, she is a former lawyer and like a motivational speaker and life coach who has no licenses in doing any of this work. But to your point, and how what kind of makes her this label of grifter is that like she's taken this opportunity from marketing from a podcast, from her social media feed, which is where she's gotten so big. That's the reason why is like there's money to be made, money to be had in this space where there
Yeah.
that does create like some of these bad actors in this space.
And lawyers and attorneys really are trained a little bit a lot differently than we are. And some might say even in the opposite way, because lawyers have a different final destination. We operate in the gray so much, and lawyers have to operate in the black and white where law is concerned. And if they want to um, manipulate words in order to get things to a certain place when they're advocating for their client who has hired them, sure, they can, but they have to support it with law. They have to support it with law, precedent setting law. Whereas we are kind of the opposite. We live in the gray. We look at each thing under emotions, not just the facts, and looking at precedent, which is what lawyers do well and need to do well. That's their job. But so it's really interesting that she comes in as an attorney, and many attorneys have a lot of good understanding of mental health, but the majority do not, you know?
So
Um,
so
so yeah.
as we're kind of getting into our show, like with Chris and I, he says it's a little bit or a lot of bit of therapy, group therapy, and just like people kind of figuring this out. I know that when things are feeling very dire, which like right now, politically,
Oof.
the client, society, what have you, in a way, my assumption is that it's kind of similar to COVID times, where I remember hearing from friends and therapists talking about like, oh my God, like it's not only are you having to navigate, like, what's kinda going on in the world, but then you're also, like, having and being there to help other folks, like, navigate that, and that you're essentially kind of dealing with the brunt of whatever societal issues are going on. So I'm just kinda curious, what are you as and other therapists, like, what are you all kind of experiencing right now? And maybe even just some, like, words of advice, for you
Yeah.
for others.
I really appreciate that question. When COVID came around, everybody was freaking out, right? Everybody, the majority of us had not been through anything like this before. It became such a political arena when it was a medical arena. Everybody had to go online. People didn't know how to do it. All of these things that happened, staying in the homes, which was terrible, especially for extroverts and not getting outside. We were going through the same thing. Meanwhile, we're trying to figure out technology, not getting outside, dealing with all of this too. And we had a lot of support groups for ourselves together. We all said, okay, let's get a glass of wine together and talk about this because we need support in this. We don't even know what we're doing here. We did our best, but when the entire world shifted permanently, um, just like what is happening now. And so I don't think, because we've been prepared as therapists for cultural climate change, although this is pretty unprecedented what we're seeing at the level we're seeing it now in the country and what's happening. But it's the same thing. We are going through it with you. We're going through it with everybody else. And because culture and marginalization is a big part of our learning process, this is at least we have a baseline for how to manage this. But people are literally hiding in their homes, and we're seeing people who are afraid to leave their homes because they're afraid they're going to get, deported and worse than that, even confined, arrested, and detained here in the country with abuses. So, since the levels of violence are increasing, we can often see this. People will give all kinds of reasons why these things happen. And we tend to look at this in this person is this way because of the effects of their environment, their biology, what genes are expressing themselves due to what traumas they've been to, and every path is individual. So now we have this person who's looking for something. um, yes, people do experience trauma, and yes, it does shape us, especially if we're unaware of how it's shaping us. And so, that being said, we can see all of this in this grand picture. So it is very challenging for us to whittle it down to a therapy session and really look at the effect that it's having on everybody. And it is really amazing and magical what can happen in these sessions, particularly in these times, because as far as my clients, they've all brought it up. I do work with a lot of marginalized, traditionally marginalized populations, and I do a lot of sex therapy, and it changes the way everybody is interacting in their homes. So it's difficult for us too. It really is. Just trying to survive in the world, which I think is a lot of what this podcast is about, right? Just trying to make sense of what's going on when we're not sure. And I think that we're all going to see it through our own lenses, of course. But this idea that we can separate politics from who we are as people might make people feel a little better and they can compartmentalize, but it's not really true.
Yeah.
Every step you take, every moment that you have in your life is shaping you. Some would say from the womb. And so there are many, many things between epigenetics, genetic expression, and the many things that happen to us moment to moment that are going to shape who we are, and the way those things interact with each other. So I think that it's very, very, we get, I don't want to sound like the victim here, but here I go. As far as first line emergency responders, they do some incredible work. Nurses, paramedics or, it's really, really crazy what they deal with on a day to day. We actually have an aspect of first response as well. And people call us for emergency sessions because of what they're going through and how the world has affected them. And many, many people in my purview have lost family members through the process of deportation or whatever we choose to call it now, because it's certainly a lot more than just deportation.
Yeah, that's something I've learned, when again, I won't speak for Tanya, I'm gonna speak of Tanya. But when she started her practice in 2019, she had a focus, and she still has a specialty in providing trauma therapy to first responders, which include therapists. And you can imagine, firemen, policemen, doctors,
Yeah.
they rarely get this support, and they need it, and therapists need it too. And it's not a surprise that at the end of a day, where you as a therapist or Tanya as a therapist who has to deal with the same stuff we're all dealing with, but is also helping however many people that day, with crises and just incredible things. It's not a surprise that you're like, where is my summer house? Where's my below deck? Just give me something so
Hmm.
that I can just escape for 2 hours and not think about the world. Um, it's, like, completely understandable. Like, it's amazing the stuff that you all do, and how you do it. I wanna get your opinion on something you touched on, and it just triggered something for me when we talked about COVID, started talking about COVID, because that's where a lot of things changed in the clinical field. One of them was really the emergence, though it had been there before, of what I will call mass therapy. So think of something like Headspace, where
Oh, yeah.
I remember where Tanya started her practice in 2019, and you would think in 2020 she would have just been swamped, and for a while she wasn't, because so many companies were providing these kind of services, AP, Headspace, whatever, free to their employees, which was great, whether it's limited. And then things, went back to, okay, now we need real therapists. But that mass therapy is still here. And now we have the advent of AI driven therapy,
Hmm.
whether that's Wobot, whether it's, it just seems like that's a big future. And I know that there are opinions on that in the therapy
Yeah.
world. Uh, so what's your take on that side of it? Whether, and I may not be using the right phrase, you can correct me if it's not mass therapy, but that's how I think of it, where Headspace can help 10,000 people in a day. But it's not the same. It's therapy, but it's obviously not the same. And not to pick on Headspace, but that and AI therapy, I think, is really shaping what's happening right now. And, mm, I'm not sure that's for good. So, what's your take on all of that and where it's going?
Yeah. Much like a lot of these things, there are pros and cons, but I will tell you that a thing like a company like Headspace, they are licensed therapists. Um, they may not be great. They may be great. It really depends on who you get. But the issue is like you said, the mass portion of it. You're not choosing your own therapist. You can certainly change. And the other thing is, it is a cheaper way at the end of the day. It is a cheaper way for companies to provide what used to be just the EAP program. EAP is about 8 sessions, and the large majority of people that came through EAP then would go on to get therapy, because they're not supposed to be dealing with major issues. Now, something like Headspace, or I can't remember, there's a lot of them out there at this point. They're the problem is they're not paying their therapists properly. There's a lot of unethical dealings at the other level. So when therapists are going there, it's because they're just starting out and they need the income, they need the clients. The pay is ludicrous. It's very low, and they basically are exploiting the therapists who are not making enough money for whatever reason, or they're just not as experienced in their practices. And so my issue with those is that they're replacing good therapists in advance with this blanket of therapists. So, for example, there was an event I wanted to go to that ended up not happening, but I volunteered as a therapist. They have had therapists at this event all the time because people can have things brought up for them. So they usually bring in about 5 to 10 therapists. They're volunteers. We enjoy doing it. We're there if they need us. And, I got an email back that said, "Oh, we've decided to go through." It wasn't Headway or Headspace or whatever. It was one of the other ones. So here's the problem: there's no vetting. You're just going to get who you get when it's on immediate like that. It's a very different process. It's not as personalized. They will say it's personalized, but it's certainly not. So I don't like that, and we have yet to see how that's going to pan out. But follow through in some of these can be a problem. Having the same therapist can be a problem because therapists are coming and going. There are a lot of problems and nuances that are becoming more pronounced with those kind of companies that I don't think it's great. On the other hand, there is access that people can get for short-term therapy that may be harder to get in other ways. So I don't always think that it's bad, but the trend of it, I don't care for. AI is a whole other conversation, right? AI can be used, and as many people have said, AI is a disaster and it's incredible at the same time. And what people are starting to understand about AI, quote unquote, therapy, or just simply I asked ChatGPT. They're there to confirm and validate that you're the greatest person ever, and it's always the other person. And you can put, people will put all their text messages into AI and be like, who's the asshole? But AI is smarter than that, and they know that they know what they need to tell you to get you to come back. Once again, this is a bottom line issue, not a therapeutic issue, and so that's already a problem. Now, as I do teach online to hybrid program, and so we do use AI to help us teach, but it's all done under our supervision in the guise of those things. We have some great tools out there, but we spend a lot of time designing them. The therapists are designing those with an instructional designer. But we discourage the use of AI. And right now, many places are education is figuring out how do we do this and still have people have the ability to think critically, particularly in this field, because things are so nuanced. We don't want people to just jump through the program because there's a big gatekeeping process to what we do. So, as far as AI therapy, I don't have a lot of faith in that because one of the things that we found is something common factors research is. What are the common factors amongst all of our theoretical approaches? So we're looking at these common factors, and the major change agent. Yes, it's the client's motivation. Yes, it's the approaches, but the major change agent is who your therapist is. What is your relationship with your therapist? And at this point, people could argue. People have AI, partners or girlfriends or all kinds of things now. I'm not against it. I kind of like the idea of a sex robot, but I digress. So here's the deal with that. It's too nuanced. It's the human being. It's you need somebody reacting in real time. You need the energy between you. Even if you do distance therapy online, there's an energy that happens. That's the change factor, or that's the prerequisite of any change that a person is asking for in therapy. That's where I think AI is going to fall short because that energy, it's simply not a human being. It's simply not a human being.
So, Tanya and I have good conversations about this, and I'll leave her opinions out of it. But I do think what you're saying is super interesting. You know, I spent a lot of time studying AI and its impact on the environment and the world and careers. And I do believe it is going to take many jobs. I really do believe that.
Yeah. Mhm.
I actually think for therapists, it's going to increase the demand for therapists. There will be plenty of AI therapy solutions. That's 100% sure.
Mhm.
But there's also going to be what you just talked about, a growing number of people who build relationships with AI because they can't do so with humans. And that is going to drive the need for therapy in and of itself because that is probably safe to say not the healthiest thing. Maybe it will be. I don't know. Maybe in the future it'll be fine. But now it's probably safe to say it's not healthy for you to build a primary relationship, a dependent relationship on AI. And the more that happens, I would just guess the more people are going to need real help. So I would say that therapy is probably a very safe profession moving forward because of that, and because people will always need and want humans as their therapist. Like, I just think that's
Yeah.
one of those things that
Well,
even though it could be replaced theoretically, I don't see that happening. I think going the other way. So
yeah.
that's my take on that.
And I also think with what you're saying is right now, human beings, human bodies, we know through our research we need light, we need outside. One of the things we talk about in therapy all the time is we use somatics. This is not new to us either. But we do know that people are driven. This is anthropological, biological. We're driven by human connection and the relationships we form with other people. And think about what's happening right now with book clubs, silent book clubs, people wanting how do I build connection in real time? Because they don't know necessarily this next generation coming up. They are starving for analog connection. And I don't recall in my growing up experience that being like we already had that. We had to. We had to go to work. We had to go to school. We had to interact with our neighbors, and I could go from there. But if you don't have to do all that, the research shows over and over again, you will become sick, certainly emotionally and empty, and potentially also physically. But the reason these things are trending right now with people is like we're missing that. We hear it all the time, and I'm not saying that we can't have a beautiful integration of both of these things. It's not to me. It's not an either or. It's not pro or anti. It's how do we integrate these things that don't destroy in the long term the very important need for mammals in general, including humans, to have that human connection? And I see it all the time. We recently went into a place that we couldn't use our phones, and I think it was just pretty much a coffee shop. And there were board games everywhere. And guess what we did? We put our stuff down, and we didn't have our phones out. We interacted differently. And I think that people are really wanting that. And that just kind of goes to your point that therapy in general is something that people really, 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 really get a lot from. And anyone that goes into the I hate therapy, or therapy doesn't work or therapy does work, it works for people and it doesn't work for some people. And that could have a lot to do with readiness and the therapist that you jive with, because you have to connect with your therapist. You have to like them, to be perfectly honest.
So, and like with our topic of kind of this rise of like pop psychology, you had mentioned that essentially it might have started with like Dr. Phil, his rise from the Oprah Winfrey Show. Thanks a lot, Oprah. To social media, where people are just putting out whatever, folks that aren't even remotely qualified influencers, and you get folks like the Mel Robbins. And then again, that notion of we're all looking at these avenues of like getting to that place of actually getting a licensed therapist. So with the Talkspace and Headspace and I forgot what the other one is. And we didn't even get to this. Like with men, the manosphere, they're going to just YouTube videos of other dudes telling you the worst things you've ever heard in your entire life that you should not
Yeah.
do, to this idea of like trying to find connection in this deeply digital world, that all of this really is, building upon each other and is connected back to that sense of finding a sense of connection with themselves, with their community, with their loved ones, finding more relationships, but then also being able to learn how to be better in those relationships. But what I'm noticing is all of these
Hmm.
things are kind of skirting around the thing that they should actually just be doing it. And that is, from what I gather, is to get an actual licensed therapist. And that, Coreen, you essentially kind of gave us all of
Yes,
the
yes,
reasons
yes, yes.
why. But that's what I'm noticing is like we always, as humans, we skirt around all of the different things, oh, instead of actually jumping into like what we should be doing. But I know we're about ready to wrap. Is there anything else around this that we might have missed, or any other key takeaways from this convo?
I could certainly talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but I do think that getting a therapist, you can also look at all your means at the same time. You can talk about those things with your therapist, but there's lots of paths to healing. I obviously advocate for therapy, but what one thing the avenue is not to healing is social media, one size fits all memes from unlicensed and untrained people around human nature. And because people don't really know what we do, they really don't. And me being an MFT, I'm trained in a systems approach. So everything is built around the systems that we're a part of, whether it be the family system or larger, or the complete system that we're living in now in our country and the world. So go ahead and look at your memes, go ahead and listen to those influencers. But if you're doing it without a therapist, you're going to be missing out on a lot of opportunity. And just to say, I know starting therapy is scary. And I know people think I'm over it because they're not thinking about it, but your body will respond and you will have issues in your life. And of course, we all have therapists. So just to put that out there, we need therapists to be good therapists so that we can have this continual journey of, yes, being better in our relationships, because it's easier to isolate yourself and now you don't have any problems because you're not interacting with anybody. So I really appreciate the topic and really appreciate an opportunity to get to share some of these things that have been on my mind for a long time outside of in my little trusted circles.
Well, it was great to have you. Perfect topic. Perfect topic. Because yes, we've said this a couple times, but this it turns into group therapy, and like already I'm just like, oh, we can't use that. We shouldn't use that because it's not really group therapy. It's more just like, hey, we all get together. We're just like, oh God, all right, we got to figure out how to get through this or that or the other. Um, and knowing how to leverage therapy and the importance of therapy and what's not therapy, and um, that not everybody is a narcissist. Except for, I'm going to say our president is a narcissist. I think that's fair. I don't know. I know you
I
can't clinically diagnose remotely. So I'm
Right.
just going to be the pop psychologist and just say that's
Well, and I
going
think
to wrap with that.
we talk amongst ourselves certainly. And again, for people listening, starting therapy can be scary, but be patient with yourself and really trust the process, because you'll be surprised what can happen as long as you find a good fit. And if you don't like the person that you're working with, go find somebody else.
Exactly. All right. So, Coreen, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. Yeah, it was great to see you again. Des, as always, thank you.
Pleasure.
Pleasure's all ours, I think is fair. And to all of you, thank you for joining us. We hope this has helped you cope in some way with the world around us. Please like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. That helps ensure more people can see the show and hear the show. Give us 5 stars. We'd love that. Visit www.bearing287.com or follow me on Substack to access other helpful content from our network. I am Chris Mevolo, and once again, on behalf of I'm Not Even Supposed to Be Here Today and Bearing 287, thanks for joining us. We will see you next week. Bye bye.